Hey everyone, it's Arshawn with you. Welcome. We're going to be talking about dealing with shutdowns today and really how do we work around the idea that we may have to deal with this as business owners, right? That can be one of our bigger challenges is we have a lot of uncertainty. And joining me in just a bit is going to be Dr. Ann Gatty. She is in Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. Some of you may have seen that there was a big court case this week in Pennsylvania. Indeed, people challenged the law that said many of these government mandates, these government requirements, these government shutdowns were indeed unconstitutional, that the government took too much power. And the federal court up there agreed. So we have a win. And suddenly now laws are reversed. This is not the first time we've seen it. We saw similar activity in Wisconsin earlier this year. We saw the government reverse a shutdown order. So these happen. Meanwhile, things also go the other way, right? We see times when the government takes and is open and then goes to a shutdown as we talk about these phases of opening here in the U.S. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. You can go up phases and down phases, which means you may be in a situation where you are opening and closing your business, which creates some real planning challenges for dealing with it, right? And now in Pennsylvania, as I mentioned, the court has said the laws were unconstitutional, but there's an appeal going on. And if the appeal wins, we could see the shutdowns come back if the higher court agrees. It creates a lot of uncertainty for business owners. And it really is what we want to dive in today. Here's Dr. Ann. I'm going to pop her up on the screen with me. Welcome. Thanks for joining.
Hi, Shawn.
Hey, Doctor. You know, for business owners, this is like a seesaw, right? I mean, that's what we want to get into today. I mean, Pennsylvania had lockdown restrictions and you had a court case. Now they're unconstitutional. Now we're going to open. But there's an appeal. They may be, who knows what the appellate court does. You may be back into lockdown. And people are seeing this throughout the entire U.S., right? Open, close, 5 people, 10 people, 50% capacity, 25% capacity. Getting 1 or 2 days or a week's notice of you can open next week. And then they got to do all the planning. It is challenging for a business to jump through that.
And I live in Pennsylvania, so
I mentioned that
through this, and it is a yo-yo. There's no doubt about it. But one of the things that becomes so important, first of all, you've got to deal with the anxiety because you can plan out maybe a week or two ahead. Right. But the other thing is, and you and I've talked about this, Shawn, but the idea of making sure you have all of your supply chain in order, because you might have to get supplies in a week's notice.
Right.
And a lot of the businesses in Pennsylvania that I've been dealing with, ones that deal with, appliances and things like that, they're open now and they can't get the appliances because those manufacturers were shut down. Yes. So it's like they're now having to get these appliances 6 months out, that there's a 6-month wait period.
Yeah, so there could be a lot of complication with that, right? Particularly across jurisdictions. You may be in state 1, Pennsylvania, let's say, and you may have a supplier in a neighboring state, Maryland, Ohio. They can be in different shutdowns, right? So it really does complicate that supply chain, because not only you have to look at you have to look at your supplier. A lot of these orders I've seen have looked at, what is your business? Is it essential? And then is the supplier business supplying an essential business? And there's a lot of uncertainty how it works down the chain. One of my clients, was getting ready for a shutdown. Then they got an order from an essential business, and the way the shutdown order was written in their county, they suddenly can open for all business, right? So, this is very arbitrary how some of these things apply, right? A lot of these orders say if you're doing essential business, then you can open. And a lot of them are open for essential business, but it allows them to then do business beyond essential business.
I love the idea of essential business. Right. If it's bringing in an income for you to take care of your family, it's an essential business. So for them to then say, oh no, your business doesn't matter. Well, come on,
Well, what I found interesting with the whole essential, non-essential, and I kind of get the idea, but this is certainly something somebody needs to go back to, right? I mean, yes, we need utilities, we need communications, we need transportation, we need some of these basic things to just live, right? And I think that was the original idea of essential, right? Is it was survival type businesses to keep human life sustained safely. And suddenly, like, everything starts getting shoehorned into essential, and NASCAR in North Carolina was declared an essential business, right? So, I mean, you start seeing that, and it becomes very clear there's a political play, right? Who has a lobby with the governor, who's buddies with the governor, who has a pet industry, right? It's not somebody really making a true life or death decision. Like, if we don't have this particular industry, people will die. That was, I think, what the original idea of essential was, but the politicians played games with it and made it meaningless.
Well, and I think that what we have found here in Western Pennsylvania and working with the chamber here in the area, we have gotten businesses to really work locally, to supply each other locally. And so you band together on a local level.
Yes, there's something to be said, right, for shortening the supply chains, right? At some level, at a certain time, it's good for us just to deal with people within our region. And that way we have the same regulatory body. We don't have the long distance transportation. There's a lot to be said for that regional cluster, right, Dr. Ann?
Well, especially if it is farming and food products and things like that, that maybe you're no longer supplying the restaurants, but now you're able to just sell directly to consumers who otherwise couldn't get the supplies and deliver it to them. So I think that there are ways in which we have been able to promote one another in that way to shorten the supply chain and also make aware. This is why it's important to know your assets and really be aware of what you have within your business that can be helpful for others. And maybe you come in and you help another business, that because you have certain capabilities that you're using in one way, but maybe in manufacturing you can use it another way, so that you just have to look out for one another at this point. I mean,
and that's been a big theme of 2020, right? Is just to look at where you are and look at what the market is, and then say, hey, what can I do? What value can I add? We talked a lot about pivoting, creating new revenue streams, and other editions of our Journey to CEO YouTube channel. One of the big things we can do is look where the opportunities are, right? We as business owners this year are really being called upon to continually assess our assets, our value added, double down on them, and knowing that the way we deploy our assets, the way we deploy our value added may be changing week to week, month to month, because of these shifting regulations.
Right. And in Pennsylvania, there has been so much anger among business owners who have been shuttered down, and then they start to open and then no, you were bad people. We got to shut you back down again. And it's very difficult to make any, even, planning out to the end of the year and making sure, that you know exactly how you're going to survive.
You can't just say, hey, we're operating, we're doing what we're doing. Let's just do a simple back of the envelope projection of what we're going to sell for the rest of 2020, because that calculation may be grossly wrong, particularly if there's another shutdown, right? If you're running a restaurant and you say, hey, okay, we're selling this much food this week, and this is how much we're bringing in, and we usually do steady business from week to week. Well, in 2019, you could just multiply that forward and say, this is my projection for the rest of the year. 2020, you can't just multiply it forward and say, oh, well, it's going to be the same for the rest of 2020. We're no longer in that business environment.
Well, the thing that also is a catch that people are finding is a challenge and a barrier is if we open, let's say we're open to 25% capacity, then we're open to 50% capacity. And you say, okay, that means we can add this many people. But if you also have to have social distancing and everybody has to be 6 feet apart, you may not have the physical capacity to be keeping social distance and be at 50% capacity. I mean, you could never get back to 100% capacity. So
right. And, you know, a lot of businesses are having to do that calculation, particularly in the restaurant industry, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Particularly, you know, different depending on your layout, depending on your physical structure. This thing's hitting very unevenly. And some restaurants can easily spill outside depending on the local climate, depending on whether there's a tent, whether there's a street you can use, right? So very, very customized by business here. It's business by business, depending on that very unique real estate tends to be unique. But
Right.
depending on the very unique attributes of the piece of real estate that your restaurant occupies, these percentage numbers can really have a drastic effect on you, and it'll affect some more than others.
Well, and you want that unique atmosphere, and yet
Right.
now it's coming back to haunt you because all of a sudden it forbids you from being able to be at 100% capacity again. I mean, it's really a challenge, and you know, I mean, throw on top of that the fact that you've got school challenges, and every school district is different. And so just being able to know how to staff things, who can come to work, is an issue for many businesses. And when
staffing can be real tricky, you know, the schedules and the work plans you had, you know, particularly a place like restaurants where people come and go at different hours every day. You don't have everybody show up at 7:30 in the morning, close down production at 4 or 5 in the afternoon. A restaurant, people tend to go over a longer period of time. People are flexing in and out throughout the day. Now you layer in you know, school hours changing, schools opening and closing, school at home. Some people taking their kids out and going to homeschool, school at home, and homeschool being two different concepts now, right?
well, I mean, the micro schools too, where 10 parents will come together and put their kids together. So you've got all sorts of challenges. I just think that, you know, if you are trying to navigate through this opening and shutting and, you know, close downs and various regulations, keeping a sharp eye on asset management and supply chain management, and then your staffing, those three areas have to be really watched. And I think that when I talk to women, I have a women's roundtable that I work with. And one of the things that they're noticing.
And I think part of this too becomes the what if planning, right? So not only do you have to look at your current numbers, but, you know, most businesses are going to run some kind of projections forward. What if we're at 25%? What if we're at 50%? What if there's social distancing, right? You got to run a tremendous number of what if scenarios, a lot more what if scenarios in 2020 than you were probably running in 2019.
Well, and the creativity in staffing is where I was going, is that a lot of individuals, well, and a lot of businesses are now saying, why am I paying this amount for downtown real estate when I can have half of these people working remotely? I've already spent the money on that to put them, to have them work remotely. Maybe I can save a chunk of change just by not investing so much in rent for corporate business headquarters.
Well, I think that's going to be a macro trend, and we started we've alluded to that here on the Journey to CEO show. Right. Guys, you can check out our past episodes at the Journey to CEO YouTube channel, also the Entrepreneur to CEO Facebook page. Connect with us. But you know, this kind of you know, a lot of costs were incurred, right? We people talk about a jump, and we've talked about this on the show too, a jump forward in technology, right? Everybody had to go out and get the computers to work from home.
Right.
Everybody had to find new ways to organize our teams. We can start to filter back to our old ways, perhaps, but we've already done the work to implement a lot of the future technology. So do we just go back to where we were at the beginning of 2020, or do we go back to a different place and our business looks radically different?
I think you're onto it, that it is going to look radically different. I think if I were to advise entrepreneurs at this time, excuse my dogs that are.
Yeah, they're noisy this morning.
I know they are. Two Great Danes and a Basset. They make noise. But what I see is that with your supply chain, if you can keep it closer and more local, you know, that you're not having to do as much international work in getting your supplies. Keep your supply chain and at least have 2 alternatives. That's going to help in these times. And then the other thing is be very creative in your staffing and know that.
And I've been a big fan of international for a long time. And a lot of my work spans across the U.S. It spans international boundaries. A lot of my clients are going in and out of other countries. There's been growing difficulties with the international environment prior to COVID because of the regulatory environment. And I talked a lot about that in my Future Done Right show. And I think we've alluded to it here on Journey to CEO, the fact that the countries were getting kind of territorial even pre-COVID about, you know, you have to follow our personal data regulation, your personal data regulation. You got to set your software up this way. You got to set your software up that way. We were already starting to see country and regional territorialism prior to COVID. Now, fast forward to COVID, and, you know, it becomes smart to shorten your supply lines, which gives you some advantages in the logistical planning side. But on the flip side, that means you can't do some of that diversity. You can't reach out and bring unique products or unique ingredients in from other regions. It just changes your whole plan.
Well, you can, but you have to know if it's not available, what next?
Then what?
I think that's the thing.
Yeah, and that's a very real possibility, right? Is you're relying on somebody in another market, perhaps another country, and suddenly, you know, they can't cross the border or the products can't cross the border. I mean, that's happening on an increasing basis, that people are in one country and you have a trading partner in another country. And, you know, we talked about the states at the beginning and the uncertainty of the state shutdowns. But when we start going country by country, you know, who knows, right? You know, I read an interesting article last night. You know, Africa, you know, there was a big fear that there would be this huge COVID outbreak in Africa. And despite minimal mitigation efforts, there's been little outbreak. And that is to say, you know, planning wise, you probably would have been saying, well, if I've got goods or services coming out of Africa or I'm trading with Africa, I've got a problem. And you would have thought that 3 or 4 months ago. It turns out you didn't. Now you may have a problem later in 2020. It becomes very complicated projecting where everybody's going.
Right. And that's why I think that, you know, looking at alternatives becomes essential. Whereas you didn't, you could just maybe lock in a couple of great providers, supply providers, but now.
Yeah. And that used to be one of your strategies, right? Is you would go with deep interviews with trusted vendors. You would build a trusted relationship. And I've seen some of these vendor questionnaires and surveys, and you ask them lots of questions about how they run their business, their management team, where do they get their supplies from. And, you know, in the pre-COVID era, you know, one strategy for dealing with risk with your customers and your suppliers was to deepen the relationship, right? The risk was still there, but you would get a relationship so deep that you would mitigate some of that risk. You would really know each other and you would take a lot of the risk off the table. Fast forward to now, you know, at what point can you make an assessment that somebody that you don't have control over has managed their own risk? That becomes a much harder thing, right? It's hard enough to assess your own risk, much less assess your supplier or customer's risk.
Yeah, and I think that the thing is too, from the vendor's perspective, they need to know that if they're making these widgets or these components that go into a gas stove, for example, that they know that you're going to be buying it. And if you're maybe saying, okay, I might buy it.
They want to know you're buying it. You want to know it's going to be there.
Yeah.
And I think for for really a much higher level now than in the past, you've got to sit down and do the analysis of what if, right? And I mean, I think this means you get you and your management team together and you almost build a list of alternate suppliers, right? I work with Joe's Widgets, and Joe's Widgets been great, and we've worked with him for 20 years. But if Joe's Widget can't supply the component I need, then I'm going to call Bob's Widgets, and then I'm going to call Sally's Widgets, right? I mean, I've almost got to spend a lot of time building lists of suppliers and alternate suppliers and customers and alternate customers, because I really just don't know what's going to happen with the broader marketplace.
Well, and that's we're talking COVID. We've also got this where you've got interruptions due to hurricanes or
Yeah.
tornadoes or
Yeah.
different catastrophes that are environmental. So I mean, you just really
those have been around for a long time, and I think a lot of people got a free pass on those because those tend to be short term, right? I mean, if
that's
you
true.
didn't do proper planning for a hurricane, unless you were completely wiped out by it, you were probably back up and running within a couple of weeks, right? And so you took a hit, you stepped sideways, you maybe moved some cash around, and you went back to business as usual. This is a completely different environment where you can't just sidestep it and go back to business as usual.
But we don't even know what the future is going to bring.
Right. A lot of talk about the new normal, right? And what the new normal is. And we don't know what the new normal is, right? And we don't know what this looks like. We're still, we talked about the court systems, right? We're still fighting it out in the court systems to figure out what closures look like and what they don't look like.
Right. And so you've got, on the one hand, we've talked about the supply line, that we have to have some alternatives and keep it closer, I would say, closer to your business as possible. The second is your assets management. Are there ways that you can use your assets differently? Being creative with your staffing. But then the other area, Shawn, is how is the behavior of your clients changing?
Yeah. Yeah, and they've probably changed drastically. I'm thinking about the restaurant industry, right? I've seen mixed things on the restaurant industry, but I was scrolling through Facebook, as I do sometimes, and somebody was posting, I have zero desire to go to a restaurant, right? So there are and I'm just going to project that if this one person said it, that there's others. So there's at least some percentage of the audience out there that doesn't want to go back to a restaurant, right?
Or go out. Period. I've talked to some individuals that are not comfortable going out in public right now, still here in Pennsylvania. Right. So, their behavior has changed. Their consumption of goods has changed. They're buying online. They're, instead of going to the library, maybe they're going and purchasing things through Kindle or borrowing through Kindle. There's a lot of difference now in how people are entertaining themselves, how they are procuring their food, clothing, all of the different essentials. Things are just different.
Yeah, it's completely different. It's a reset marketplace. And I think it behooves most businesses to go back and reassess, right? So I think that's one of our key lessons here, right? Is do a reassessment of it. Go back and figure out who we are and where we're at. And then we got to do a lot of what if scenarios, right? We talked about that in the show, right? So we got two things going on as business owners: reassessment, and then also a lot of what ifs.
And you know what? Use this as
so I think we got to do both more than we used to in the past. Our job as business owners, as leaders, has changed. We need to now be more into this assessment phase and less into just assuming things are what they are.
Well, I think use it as an opportunity. If you were doing some kind of work where you're supplying certain products, maybe this is a time now where people are not needing that dye tool that you had made, let's say, as much. Right. That is going away. This is your time to expand into another area. Perhaps you've already got your manufacturing set up that it can be realigned in a different way. So, I mean, this could be an opportunity for you to, as you're saying, reassess, but also use this as a time to say, okay, in our journey through our business,
reassess and say, hey, here's our opportunities, right? And so I mean, it's a different year. I think we can feel defeated, and some percentage of business owners are going to let them go there. But the truth is, this is opportunity, right? This is the time to say, hey, the market's shifting, it's disrupting. If they're going sideways, then I can do something different.
Right, exactly.
And I can create opportunity. I can find something that somebody else maybe didn't find, or I can apply those assets and skills we talked about in the beginning in a new way.
Well, because you're not entrepreneurs, naturally, look for opportunities. And so put your entrepreneur, you may be a CEO where you're now comfortably working your business, but this may
Right.
be an opportunity to step back into that entrepreneurial spirit and reassess and then make some strategic plans, decisions to move forward in a different trajectory.
Yeah, with you and your team. And I want to take a moment. I want to welcome our viewers to go over to our Journey to CEO YouTube channel, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, forward that channel out to your employees and your strategic partners. Tell them that you're engaging in a new way of thinking. Dr. Ann and I remain available. We have workshops. We have other things that you can engage in if you want to get your team around this. But this is really a time to say, okay, the government shutdowns aren't going to beat me. I'm going to learn new ways to be strategic. I'm going to apply some new thinking, and we're going to go forward.
Right.
And so, folks, this is a great opportunity. Check out our work at Entrepreneur CEO. We're welcoming you into the community. We'd love to talk with you more. We record these videos usually weekly, either Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern, Friday mornings 10 a.m. Eastern. Keep an eye out for us. Most importantly, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Get on our Facebook page so that you see these things pop up and hang out with us. And we want to see your comments, so drop them to us. All right, folks, thanks for joining us and great conversation.
Thank you.
Viewers, pat yourself on the back for doing the hard work, and we'll be back again with you very soon.